This comes from the Associated Press. Are you ready? An unidentified wingless object traveling at high speed passed dangerously close to a Swiss Air jetliner, a 747, a Boeing 747, flying between Philadelphia and Boston, according to the airline on Friday. The pilot and co-pilot gave U.S. investigators different descriptions of the object that passed about, get this folks, 50 yards from the Boeing 747 after it had taken off from Philadelphia on August 9th. The pilot told the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board that the object was long and wingless. Co-pilot said it was more spherical. The incident took place at 23,000 feet. The plane's final destination was Zurich, Switzerland. That is from the Associated Press. So, it looks like a 747 just had a close encounter with something. All right, here we go. Bob Lazar is the ex-government scientist who, in 1989, came forward with the fact that he had been part of a team of scientists who back-engineered extraterrestrial disks, flying saucers, in other words, at a base known as S4, some 15 miles south of the infamous Area 51 at Groom Lake. Bob's story is the main reason behind the state of Nevada changing the name of Nevada State Highway 375, the highway to Area 51, or S4, to its new name, the Extraterrestrial Highway. Indeed. Bob currently runs a company that manufactures and repairs alpha radiation detectors. He also creates CGI computer-generated graphics and simulations for technical and legal demonstration videos, for which he uses his mainframe supercomputer, which, by the way, is the second fastest computer in the state of Nevada, second only to the one at Nellis Air Force Base. Bob also has a small photo processing lab in his home. In his spare time, Bob does pyrotechnical and rocket research and throws Desert Blast, his annual fireworks blowout, at the Nevada desert. And if memory serves, he also fools around with alternative fuels for cars. He comes this morning with Gene Huff, Bob's longtime friend and business partner, who is the writer and co-producer of the Lazar tape. Gene is a real estate appraiser and screenwriter. His screenplay S4, the Bob Lazar story, has recently been optioned and was chosen over 3 other screenplays on the Lazar story, written by writers Jim Cresson, I guess that's right, Cresson or Cresson, who wrote The Morning After, with Jeff Bridges and Jane Fonda, Roy Carlson, who wrote China Moon, with Ed Harris and Madeline Stowe, and David Rabe, I guess it would be, Rabe, who wrote Casualties of War with Sean Penn and Michael J. Fox, and co-wrote The Firm with Tom Cruise and Gene Hackman. So, this is quite a coup, obviously, for an entry-level screenwriter. But then again, Gene has had the inside track. Good morning, Bob. Are you there?
I'm here.
And Gene, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Bob, is it really true? It had to have been 4, maybe 5 years ago that I interviewed you in concert with John Lear.
You know, I honestly don't remember that. My friends tell me I have about the worst memory that can be had, but from what I recall, years ago I remember John Lear apparently booking me on your show and never telling me about it.
Yeah, I remember that.
But I don't, and then I really don't remember ever doing the show.
No, there was a time, maybe even a couple of years before that, when we had you on for a short while.
Art, I think he called in.
That was it. That was it.
He called in when Lear was on the show. Right?
That's what it was. Yeah. Yes.
Well,
yes.
I don't even remember that, but I'll take everyone's word for it.
All right. Well, in fact, we now have such a gigantic audience out there that hardly anybody knows who you are, Bob, except for, of course, ufologists and so forth, who would be very familiar with your story. So the great majority of the audience, 99%, have no idea who Bob Lazar is. Now, I guess that means we have to begin at the beginning with regard to how you... Well, first of all, Bob, you're a physicist, correct?
Mm-hmm. Or was at the time.
Was at the time, yeah. How did you become involved with, or begin to get involved with, whatever it is out there at Area 51, or is specifically S4?
Well, let me try and give you the Reader's Digest version. Some years ago, I was working at Los Alamos National Labs in New Mexico. One particular day, I was going down to the lecture hall to hear Edward Teller speak, who, as most people know, is the father of the hydrogen bomb.
Yes.
I got down there a little early because I wanted to get in, assuming there was going to be a crowd of people, and actually, to my surprise, there was hardly anyone there. Coincidentally, that day, the local newspaper in town, the Monitor, had printed a front-page article on me. And right outside the lecture hall was Dr. Teller reading the front page of the paper. So I thought it was a perfect opportunity to introduce myself and just say hi.
Absolutely.
It was just a casual meeting, and the only reason I bring it up is years later I had moved out of Los Alamos after I quit working for the lab. I opened up my own business that did some contract work for the lab, and also started a one-hour photo shop for my wife that she ran there. We later moved out of Los Alamos to Las Vegas, and again, some time later, I decided, I had missed working in the scientific community, so I decided to get back in and send out resumes. I sent them out really all over the place to the places where I'd essentially like to live a more... I really don't remember where else, but one of the other resumes I sent was to Dr. Teller's attention, and I had referenced our meeting back then. A short time later, I got a call from him, and he did remember me, to my surprise, and said we might have a position you're interested in. I said, great. I went down and was interviewed. At that time, there were a couple EG&G buildings by McCarran Airport out here.
I recall
in Las Vegas.
Yes.
I really don't know what's there now. Someone tells me there's still one building, but there used to be two before they expanded the airport. One was special projects, and I don't know what the other one was. But in either case, I was told to go down there for an interview. The interview was relatively short, and I really don't remember specifically what the job entailed, but they told me I was basically overqualified and would become bored with it in a short time. I said, fine, but they said, we might have something else in the future for you. I said, fine, okay, and basically went back home.
Figuring they had blown you off.
Right. I really don't remember what the job was, but it didn't really even sound too exciting to me, so it really didn't ring my bell at that point.
Do you recall anything about a technician level or something that would have been boring?
I really don't. Remember this, when I go through most of this stuff, people are amazed, boy, how come you can't remember these facts? This is a, fantastic point in your life, and but, it's also a decade old now, and it's hard to remember specifics here and there. However, as it turned out, they did call back and had another position. The position was stated to be something that was involving a field propulsion system, which to me, in my mind, sounded something along the lines of some electromagnetic propulsion, something that might be used in space, maybe, I don't know, an ion drive system using mercury vapor or something like that. Or
you've always been fascinated by propulsion systems.
Anything with, exerts tremendous amount of energy, from, explosives to, high-energy weapons, anything along those lines, propulsion, and and coincidentally, the article that Dr. Teller was reading was about a car that I had converted to run on a jet engine.
Now, you see, I remembered that. And then you converted another one, I believe, to run on hydrogen, didn't you?
Yeah, actually, I'm really surprised that you remember that. I don't remember.
I have a good...
So that is one of the number one things I get asked about.
I know. I have a good memory, Bob. For some,
I'm
for some
envious
things.
of that. But in either case, I after a more or less lengthy interview, I accepted the job, and of course I had to go back a second time.
Can you remember any of the details of this rather lengthy interview? I mean, was a lot of it security-oriented?
Well, there was certainly a lot of security-oriented questions and so forth later on. However, keep in mind that I had just come from Los Alamos just a couple of years before.
That's true.
Where I had Q clearance, civilian, top secret clearance.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they really didn't have to go and dig deep back into my past to see if I was, of Russian descent or anything along those lines. So, basically, the job just seemed like a, typical research and development job. I was anxious to get started on it, and things went on. All they told me is that it was in a remote area out in the desert, and that I would fly out there maybe once, possibly twice a week, just to kind of get caught up on stuff, and they had to reinstate my clearance, which would take, perhaps a couple weeks, maybe a month at the latest.
Sure.
And so in the meantime, I was given essentially busy work to do, or at least that's how it rang in my mind. And this is typical, too, at Los Alamos. If you're initially hired there before your clearance goes through, sometimes, obtaining Q clearance can take up to 13 months. So they don't just have you sit at home. You'll, before you go to work for the lab, sit around and work on alarm systems or something like that. Doesn't, something usually below your potential, but something to keep you busy.
That rings true. I was in the Air Force. They did that to us all the time.
Yeah, it's pretty common. So I thought, well, that's very typical. I had no idea what this would actually entail until I got into it, and obviously looking through their eyes, I guess it made sense that they couldn't, of course, divulge what this job would actually entail before they had, gone through all the security and whatnot. But, that's essentially how the job came about.
All right. One thing that I would think you would remember is your impressions of Mr. Teller.
I do, as far as what?
Well, what kind of guy was he? Just simple questions. What kind of guy was he?
He was, he seems to have two faces, which is strange. In talking to him one-on-one, he's a very polite, pleasant, intelligent man. However, virtually any interview you'll see of this guy, he comes across as the most pompous, mean person you have ever run into in your life.
Pompous and mean.
I don't know how else to describe him, but he was not nearly as short, not physically speaking, but I mean, if you see him in interviews, you'll see him answer questions specifically to the point, short, and on to the next question, and not be very talkative, not offer any information other than what you're immediately talking about, and in person he was certainly not that way. So he was, the exact opposite, very pleasant and willing to talk about anything. Of course, we didn't talk about nuclear weapons or anything.
Well, that's what I was going to ask about. Last night I interviewed Professor Michio Kaku.
Never heard of him.
A very preeminent physicist back at New York University, and he, too, has worked with Professor Teller. And I asked Professor Kaku why he had not participated in the hydrogen bomb development, And he said he simply chose not to. He wanted to go into a different direction with physics, and had quite a bit to say about Edward Teller. And apparently he was consumed during the Cold War years with national security, with being concerned about national security and...
This is Dr. Teller you're talking
yes,
about.
Yes, and developing bombs. And, in fact, even today... the programs go on, I guess, with the third generation of hydrogen bombs, sort of designer bombs, Professor Kaku said. Anyway, that's why I asked you about Edward Teller. Listen, everybody hold tight. We're at the bottom of the hour, and we'll be right back. Bob Lazar and Gene Huff are my guests, and the story that you're about to hear unfold will curl your hair. I'm Art Bell. This is Coast to Coast AM. Now back to Bob Lazar and Gene Huff. Gentlemen, you're back on the air again. All right, Bob. So you got the job. You landed the job, and they had you doing busy work, and then what?
Well, not busy work hadn't started.
Oh.
That's what I thought was going to happen. Instead, where did we leave off?
Well, actually, with busy work, they were kind of...
Well, that's,
He had anticipated busy work, but now you had to go to work the first day.
Yeah, essentially. I guess essentially it was to get caught up with what was going on. And really, to my surprise, the security was a little more than oppressive. Generally you're just assigned a badge and shown the general procedures and things of that sort. This was a little different.
Are you still talking about the facility near Las Vegas, or are you talking about being flown up there now?
No, this is when finally I was flown.
Okay. So
I go to McCarran Airport, right by the EG&G building, and
right.
I'd be flown to Groom Lake. As I landed there the first time, right across from where the plane parked, there's a security office, or was a security office. And that's, I believe I spent quite a while there, but, reviewing, how secure things are, so on and so forth. But, this is not where I worked. Where I did work was about, from my estimates, about 10 or 15 miles south of there. We were taken there in a converted school bus, those big Bluebird jobs that was painted kind of a dark navy blue.
There's a lot of people, Bob, who don't even believe that Area 51 exists, by the way, much less S4. I live out here in Pahrump. Bob,
well, I think, people...
I can tell
people don't believe Area 51 exists?
Well, there are a lot of people who don't. But I can tell you, Bob, when you drive up by the VFW here in Pahrump at about 4:30 or 5 in the morning, there's a whole bunch of buses out there, and they've got signs right on the side of the buses. I saw it about a month ago, and it just says Area 51.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, they're not bothering anymore to keep that secret.
I guess.
Now, from the Kingdom of Nye, more Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell. Here again is Art.
Anyway, so then they take you from Groom Lake, the main facility. And incidentally, Bob, up on my website, I've got a picture, a pretty good one, the best one I've ever seen, of the Groom Lake facility. And it shows what appears to be three large hangars, with the one in the center perhaps being the largest. Is that your recollection?
3 large hangars.
Yeah, 3 big hangars. There are a lot of other attendant buildings, but 3 rather large hangars.
I don't recall there being 3, obviously large hangars on the approach in from Las Vegas. That stood out that much above everything else.
Okay.
I recall a huge satellite dish, but for the most part, most of the time I was going there at night and certainly didn't have a run of the place. All I did was get to go in. One time I got to go to the cafeteria, but other than that, it was merely a stop.
Toward S4.
Yeah, toward S4, but I don't recall there being three large hangars really that stood out more than anything else.
Did you ever see anything unusual at all at Groom Lake?
The thing I did see that was unusual was some sort of advanced rocket or jet plane. People have called it Aurora. I don't know if it was Aurora or if it even exists. But John Andrews from the Tester Corporation and a few other aviation buffs kind of interviewed me more or less about that. It was something along the lines of an X-15 shaped type of craft. Now, we were driving away from this as it was taxiing, but it was a horrendously loud tearing sound that the engines made. And I think my original description was that it made it sound like the air was tearing, and that's the best description I could give to it. Now, I certainly have heard about the new generation of scramjet engines that have supersonic airflow inside that burn liquid methane and so on and so forth. Whether that was these, I don't know. But I did get a look up the exhaust as we were turning, and it was they were rectangular exhausts with some sort of vanes inside. That's all the information I can give, and what it was, I don't know. But that was the strangest thing I ever saw.
Do you recall the general shape of the aircraft? Was it close to what we would call a lifting body?
No, well, even though the X-15 was a lifting body, it was not a lifting body like you'd see on an F-16 or something, where there'd be a lot more wing incorporated into the body. It was more along the lines of a long, slender body, maybe the cross between an F-104 and an X-15 for those people that are familiar with those planes. Very short, stubby wings, which translates to me, high speed of rotation, high flight speed, and things like that. But again, I didn't get a very good look at it, and I don't know. It could have been anything, a scientific research vehicle or anything. I'm certainly not claiming that was Aurora. But sometime later, some of those people were down in Rachel, and they heard and recorded a sound that they interpreted as the sky tearing and played it back to me, and it was, in fact, the identical sound. So a couple of years later, it was still operational, whatever that thing was. But that was the only unusual thing I ever saw there.
All right, so you landed, and they generally then, you would, I guess, get off on the tarmac there and get right on a bus?
Yeah. Well, straight across from where the plane parked, head end, straight across from there in kind of a large parking area was the security building, and that's where we picked up the bus and went south. The first time I did go in, and it was an extensive little get-together with the security people there, and signed all kinds of strange forms.
Were there a lot of people on the bus?
No, not going down to S4. Generally, the person that accompanied me all the time was Dennis Mariani, who was my supervisor at that time.
Okay. And so then they had you sign all kinds of forms. What kind of forms?
Well, everything from virtually signing away my constitutional rights. So should anything go wrong as far as me spilling my guts.
Spilling your guts, yep.
They would, essentially be judge, jury, and executioner. As far as the authorization to attain the clearance there, that was an order that was signed by President Reagan, which I saw on the desk. I'm trying to remember some of the other paperwork. Beforehand, I gave permission to have my phone lines monitored.
Boy. And can you remember any of the wording? I mean, you said you signed something that would allow them, if you blabbed, to be judge, jury, and
I had signed something like that. I mean, that may be a slight exaggeration of how the wording was, but certainly I signed, I'm trying to remember what it was, like a 10-10 agreement. If you've heard that before, I don't remember the exact title of the document, but it says if you violate, national security secrets, it's 10 years in jail and a $10,000 fine. Does that sound familiar to you?
It does.
That before.
It does.
I've signed something like that before, but this is certainly far above and beyond that, which was kind of shocking, actually. But at the time, you pretty much just blow it off and say all this means is that I'm going to be involved in something, extremely interesting, and
sure.
It's great. So what? I have no intention of violating any rules or causing any problems. So there's no sweat.
I understand. I mean, by that time you're probably tantalized, thinking this.
Oh, really?
I
was, certainly pumped up.
It's going to be real fun.
Exactly.
All right. So you sign all the forms, including one to tap your phone, huh?
Right. They did. That was, again, before I went down there. That was down at EG&G, and I gave them permission to do that. But that was only for a limited amount of time. I don't recall how long that was for. And
Bob,
to me, that's kind of a silly thing to do in the first place, because if you're going to monitor my phone, why tell me? It kind of defeats the purpose.
Maybe because otherwise they have to go through some sort of legal procedure and get some sort of court something or another. So maybe
but you would think in the interest of national security they could circumvent all that, but...
well, they probably do, actually.
Who knows?
when they need to.
I had actually doubted that they were actually doing that. Once in a while everyone hears little clicks and pops and buzzes on their phone, and, I really didn't think that was it. And,
my view is a good tap is one you never hear.
Well, this is my point exactly. Sometime later, I guess we'll get into that. But when things turned sour, actually before they did, they had come to my house 30 minutes after I got off the phone with Gene one day, and we were joking around on the phone. They came to my front door 30 minutes later with a transcript of our conversation and outlined were the questionable phrases that I had spoken. Now, this is amazing to me, considering the closest FBI building down here is on Charleston and
Maryland
3rd or Charleston and Maryland Parkway. But, I mean, that's an amazing feat. It almost makes me think they had a little mobile setup somewhere.
Well, it is. You're a computer guy, and I've heard, maybe you could confirm this for me, that the NSC has the ability to have supercomputers which virtually are monitoring perhaps even millions of conversations, looking not at the entire conversation, but listening
exactly.
for key words.
Well, that's how they caught that drug kingpin down in, where was it, Panama or Mexico?
That's right, and that was cellular.
They scanned every single phone line and just picked out certain words and grabbed them.
So I encourage my audience to constantly, in the middle of a conversation, just simply say, kilo, kilo.
Art, actually, we say assassination, president, things like that.
Oh, jeez. All right. Well, anyway, so onward to Area S4. I guess is it a paved road or a bumpy little ride?
That's quite a bumpy little ride. It's a dirt road down there, follows along the base of the mountain, and coming up to the facility, it's right off of Papoose Dry Lake Bed.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a small mountain range on the side, and built right into the side of the mountain is the installation itself, the S4 installation, and it's composed of hangar doors around one side, and then I believe on the on the south-facing side, there's is the main entrance into the facility.
Were the windows on the bus darkened, or could you see out as you went?
No, you could. The only place you could see out was the front. On the bus, most of the times I had gone down there was the driver, a security guard, and Dennis Mariani. The security guard almost always stood right up front, not sitting down, but holding that bar, which is right by the door on those buses.
Sure.
I don't know if it was in an effort to block my view out there or just to intimidate me and stare at me. But that's how he rode the entire trip down there. So it was always difficult to see exactly where we were. And
what was in between?
Right. Well, there's really nothing in between. It's pretty much desert.
Dennis Mariani, who was he?
He was my supervisor. What his exact position was pretty much unclear to me. He's a stocky guy, smokes a cigar, kind of looked very military-looking, short blonde hair. It's about the best I could describe him. Maybe, late 30s, early 40s.
Not gregarious, more security-like?
Yes. So I really don't know what his exact function was in the world.
He didn't wear a military uniform, though, did he, Bob?
No, he didn't.
Clothes.
Right, civilian.
But you can kind of tell military guys.
Yeah, just by the way they look.
And the way they comport themselves and so forth and so on.
But, again, this is my guesstimation of what this guy was about.
Was he your constant shadow? Was he with you all the time?
For the most part, until I learned how things operated there. I guess I shouldn't jump ahead that far yet. Well, I might as well. For the most part, for science to progress anywhere, if you're doing any sort of research whatsoever, one of the things that is vital is free discussion, open and free discussion amongst the people that are working on the project.
Okay, right.
Well, obviously, it's how ideas are bounced off other people, and
that was
the only way things can progress.
Wasn't that one of the main contentious points during the development of the atomic bomb in the Manhattan Project? Everything was compartmentalized, and
the military just loves to do that.
And the scientists just hate it because they want to bounce ideas off each other.
Exactly.
So you're saying, really, in 1989, that was still going on?
Well, probably. Well, I don't know. How would I know how bad it was during the atomic age? But it was very oppressive. So much so that our job was very compartmentalized. Every aspect was split into groups of people. Groups of people are quite literally two people. You work on the buddy system. In other words, the only person I can talk to, the only person I can discuss anything with, the only person I can relate to is the one person who I work with. Any other aspect of the project, any other questions are simply not to be asked. So immediately you're interfering with your progress in that if whatever you're doing interacts with anything else anywhere, you've run into a block wall.
You don't even really know if you're the first person to come down and be assigned this task, do you?
Exactly.
There
in fact,
could have been
I was
others
told that I wasn't.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But, you really have no idea what's going on. And I'm sure if you found that, Part A connects to Part B, which we're not allowed to see, I'm sure there would be some way to gain some of that information. But,
Bob, not only were you not the first person assigned that task, but this might be an interesting point to tell them why you were told you were hired.
No, that's true. I was, actually, one of the questions I've always had is, why did they hire me? Certainly for this project, I would not be the most intelligent, the most resourceful person that they could possibly hire out of all the people at Los Alamos or anywhere else in the world for that matter. So I've always wondered exactly why they would have picked me.
And so why then did they?
I still don't know. I have always wondered this. I've ran a lot of things through my mind, different possible scenarios, and they really, none of them make any sense. Was it because Edward Teller just thought I was a nice guy and essentially juiced me into the position?
It sounds,
it
sounds that way.
Yeah, but, in a project like this, why would something like that happen where every person counts? You're talking in a project where there are only actually 22 active people working on it.
But when Teller speaks, the military listens.
Yeah, that's true. But, I didn't know him well enough. As far as my scientific background, it was actually fairly limited. I was working at Los Alamos on the working with the accelerator at that point, so it really wasn't a propulsion-based job, anything to do with what I was about to have my hands on.
Maybe they assumed you did have the right background. Maybe they didn't really know what they had on their hands. Well,
one of the...
I tell you, we're coming up on a break, and we'll pick up on this point when we get back. Everybody relax. It'll be a good one. Bob Lazar and Gene Huff are my guests. Belt in. It's going to be a good one. Back now to Bob Lazar and Gene Huff, and the story continues. Here we are at Area S4 south of Groom Lake, and I guess by now you're in great anticipation, Bob, wondering what you're going to be doing.
I was just about to make a point before we broke, and I can't remember it.
Well, that's why you have Gene Huff. Gene?
Gene doesn't remember either.
Gene doesn't remember either.
Well, I think my short-term memory...
He was talking right before we broke about he had no idea why they chose him of all the people in the world. But that's...
Well, actually, Gene, you had said, why don't you tell them, Bob, why they chose you? And Bob said, I have no idea. And we were talking about the work he did at Los Alamos.
Right. Yeah, he was... I was implying something else. In other words, I was telling him, reminding him of why there were vacancies, why they needed to hire someone, why someone wasn't in his slot.
And we were talking about the fact that he was not the first one necessarily.
Right.
And that makes sense. In other words, if they had something they didn't understand, I can imagine they would bring in an array of people of different disciplines to take a look-see.
Well, that might have been the case, but to this day I can't figure out why. If certainly you look at my record and the way I approached things and the work I had done before was a little more renegade, and maybe that's what they were doing. Was looking for someone that would approach a project from a different road. And
are you able to talk about what you did at Los Alamos?
I did several things. Initially, I was working on the polarized proton target on the accelerator. The accelerator there at Los Alamos is a linear accelerator. It stretches about, if I remember, about a half mile, and it's one of the more unique setups in that instead of running a single experiment on the output of the accelerator, the beam is split into different areas. And all these different areas are, I don't know really if they're leased or rented to other countries or other scientists, but several other people and other groups from all over the world essentially can conduct experiments simultaneously. At different times, they'll fire different particles down the target for different lengths of time, and everyone can run their own experiments and see what's going on. There was also some Star Wars development done there.
Okay. I'm sitting here listening, trying to imagine any application for what you were about to do, and you don't.
At S4.
Yeah.
There's none. There was no direct connection at all. This is one of the things that has perplexed me forever.
But how could there be?
Maybe this was the point that I was going to make. In fact, it is. It just popped back in my mind. What was strange about the interviews I had was, certainly there was some technical questions here and there. They essentially knew my background already, but what they were most concerned was what I had done in my spare time, which I found to be very unusual.
Now, what had you done in your spare time? You had worked with propulsion systems in your spare time, right?
Right. I mean, they were essentially concerned with more of my, for lack of a better word, playtime than they were with what I was or what I had currently done.
All right. Well, let's take this back to Edward Teller. When you had a conversation with Edward Teller, Did you talk about your playtime? Did you talk about...
Well, I was talking about at that time the static ramjet engine that was, in fact, that was in the front of the paper. So we were talking about, in fact, at that time I had filed patents on it, of how the device operated without the need for fuel pumps and things of that sort because of the type of fuel it used.
What is a static ramjet engine?
It was an offshoot of a pressure jet engine, which was invented by Eugene Gluharf, who was also coincidentally the inventor of the rocket ejection seat that's used on all fighter aircraft.
Indeed.
He developed that, I believe, in the 50s, and in the 70s I had run into him, and really, as a kid back then, started working in my spare time as I went to Pierce College at that time, working to improve on the design. I came off with an offshoot of the design, which was a little more complicated, but produced a lot more thrust. The basic design of the engine is it has no moving parts at all. One property of propane is that it sticks to hot metal. Mm-hmm. This eliminates all the needs for flame holders and things of that sort inside the engine, which makes it more complicated. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think of a couple other points about it. It was a pretty different design as far as jet engines go. And with the changes I made, it was essentially a different type of engine. And after I had gone past the development of it on a test stand, I built a slightly larger one and installed it in the back of a car. And it was a convenient mobile test setup as opposed, well, and additionally, it was something kind of interesting to play around with in the desert.
Sure.
Which is where the whole article came from in the newspaper. But
all right, well, then I think you've answered your own question.
But someone playing around with jet engines really doesn't qualify him or her to work on something of extraterrestrial origin.
No, but then again, who does have qualifications to go work on something?
Well, there's a point.
So I can understand, and here's how I would, based on what you said, I'll bet here's what happened. The article in the paper, the conversation with Edward Teller, and probably his suggestion, which probably amounts to more of an order, that you'd be a good person, kind of a rebel, to go take a look at this stuff they had at Area S4. That would be my best guess. That's a pretty good guess. What do you think, Gene?
I agree. I think that Edward Teller's word carried all of the weight in the world, and I also agree with you that who would have a background, who would be qualified to work on, a gravity propulsion system and an antimatter reactor and the things Bob later ran into. And Bob's a comprehensive problem solver, has a background in physics and electronics and in propulsion, and I can understand why they'd hire him.
Well, yeah, if you're going to go, if you really have extraterrestrial craft and you're trying to figure out what makes them go, then you're going to go find somebody who works out of the box. In other words, is a bit of a rebel and kind of works out of the normal box and experiments and tinkers and is interested in propulsion. That's the kind of person you're going to go for, because there's nobody out there with specific qualifications for that job.
Yeah, obviously.
In addition to probably other considerations of a psychological profile and,
Yeah, that they were also very concerned with.
Your psychological profile?
Yeah, they were concerned with how I handle stress. In fact, I remember one of the questions was, have you ever thrown tools around in the lab or anything to that effect? And I thought these were very strange questions for what we were talking about. But well, in either case, I got the job and wound up there. But
haven't you ever thrown tools?
No, actually, I haven't.
I have. I've kicked radios too. One all the way across the room, put my foot through it. Anyway. So then you seem qualified in most every way, as much as one could be qualified for that. So here you come to S4, and were you immediately led into this area where these craft were?
No, absolutely not. In fact, the first day there, I went in and I think my first stop was to go to the medical office there. I believe there was a nurse in there. I'm pretty sure that was my first stop, and I had to go through a series of what I was told were allergen tests.
Allergen tests?
Yeah. They took my arm and drew a little graph on it and pricked each little area in my arm with different little needles.
No kidding.
And, in fact, I was not permitted back to work, I think, for 2 weeks until there was a reaction, or if there was to be a reaction, with any of the substances they put on my skin. And they said, we're working with some extremely exotic materials here that we're not all that familiar with, and we want to know if there's going to be any problem with it. And I said, well, that's, again, odd, but acceptable. And I was also given an injection there, too, which was a wide spectrum, what did they call it?
Antibiotic?
No, it wasn't a wide spectrum antibiotic. It was a wide spectrum something or other.
It's always good to know what they're shooting you with.
Yeah. I thought, now, I mean, there have been so many, I'm sure, which we'll get into later, so many ridiculous stories, offshoots of what actually had happened to me. People said, oh, well, they injected you with Thorazine or so on, or this was the memory drug that wiped out your memory so you could only remember back and forth, and, so on and so forth. But I'm pretty sure that wasn't the case. This was, they were mainly concerned about the, here you're dealing with actual extraterrestrial materials. And if we're going to be crawling around on them, taking things apart and having contact with them, they imagine they want to make sure that the people working on it are fairly safe. Well, that in one hand weighed against the fact that, don't forget the United States government fed fallout to people from time to time.
You bet.
And, did other strange things to them. But
when you originally told your story, Bob, years ago, that wasn't known. Hazel O'Leary was not around yet, and everybody regarded your story as absolutely incredible, beyond belief. But then when Hazel O'Leary stepped out and said the following occurred, everybody went into kind of a stupor and said, my God, we did that? So your story isn't so out of line.
Well, a lot has actually changed in the past 10 years. If you remember, 10 years ago, too, the predominant theory about how gravity propagates in any physics textbook, related to gravitons. Mm-hmm. And now the predominant theory is gravitational waves, which is exactly how some of, and some scientists and physicists of that time, pointed out one of the many reasons they say the reason this story can't be true was that this was absolutely ridiculous, so on and so forth. And now it's spoken of as a matter of fact. This is how gravity propagates through space. And it's just interesting to see how things slowly, over the span of a decade, quietly change.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing I do keep an eye on.
Yes.
But
and I take it your arm didn't break out inappropriately, so you passed.
No, I think it did develop a small eruption somewhere, but it was nothing to be concerned about, or so I was told. So we just proceeded from there.
As you know, there is a group of people suing the government over illnesses they have suffered from work they did at Area 51, and that is proceeding quietly in court. It's not going to be so quiet when it goes to trial, but that's underway now. So, indeed, there are some pretty exotic materials up there.
Actually, you just reminded me of something. When was that, Gene? When, was it right after that where I collapsed from the kidney?
Oh.
You remember that? And
right.
Was that there or after I had left the project?
No, you were still in the project.
That was right after that.
Right after they did these tests and gave him a shot.
It's kind of surprising. I forget that.
Take a strange substance, and
all I remember is that you were at a Toyota dealer or something like that,
and he was in such pain. His kidneys hurt so bad he thought he was going to die. And to that point, Bob had never had any health problems or had never had any sedatives or painkillers, and the doctor gave Bob a shot of Demerol. And I called him, and he was floating on cloud nine. It wasn't even coherent, and I came to his house to see what was wrong, and then he was literally high from a painkiller they gave him just so he could stand the pain in his kidneys. So whatever went through his system certainly stuck there.
Yeah, so there was an adverse reaction to something.
Do you think that was, well, of course you have no way of knowing whether it was the allergy test they put you through or the shot they gave you?
Or was it an amazing coincidence that,
but he had no prior kidney problem.
Yeah, I mean, it is,
Well, I take it you went to the doctor.
I did, yeah.
What did he say?
I don't remember. I think he said he gave me a shot of painkiller, Demerol, I believe it was, and he took a urine sample, a blood test, and he asked if I had any previous problems, anything strange, and obviously I said no. Certainly didn't mention anything about getting an injection.
Right.
In a strange place in the middle of a desert.
Right.
Didn't they do X-rays or a CAT scan or something and find
not a CAT scan. They did they did just an X-ray to see if there was any blockage. But
there was nothing.
A day later, or I think even the next morning, everything was fine. The X-rays came back negative, and I believe the blood work came back negative too, as did the urine sample. So, in fact, I think his conclusion was that perhaps I had passed a small stone and, wound up in my bladder, and then it would probably hurt coming out again. But, that never occurred, and, whether or not that scenario is correct, again, is just speculation. But I don't know, that you just stirred that up in my memory. I don't think I've even mentioned that since it...
That's right. That's how little bits and pieces come back. How's your health now, by the way, and since then? Okay?
Oh, fine. No problem.
All right. So anyway, you pass all their little tests.
Pass all that. The next thing to happen was that I was led into a room with quite a number of little briefing packages, briefing papers. These range from 2 pages to about 5 pages, little folders with different aspects of the project that I was working on. This was, I believe, the part of the first day and the second day that I was working there.
So they just sat you down at a table and had you begin to read about...
Yeah, what these were just basic overviews of what each group was doing, just essentially to give you knowledge of what the other facets of the project were about.
A general overall knowledge.
Right, had no specifics whatsoever, but if for instance, there was a group with metallurgy, so on and so forth.
All right.
And also contained some of the names of the projects.
Oh, it did?
Yeah.
All right. That's a good place to break, so relax. We'll be back shortly. The story you're hearing is a remarkable one, and we're beginning to hear new details because Bob's remembering new details. Bob Lazar and Gene Huff are my guests. The subject, Area 51, more specifically Area S4, where, as you will hear shortly, extraterrestrial craft were back-engineered. Yes, that's what Bob did. I'm Art Bell, and this is Coast to Coast AM. Back to Bob Lazar and Gene Huff. Gentlemen, you're back on the air again. All right. So here we are. You're in a little room with a bunch of briefing papers giving you more or less an outline, but not specifics of the work being done on. Actually, at that point, did they state what it was that was being worked on?
Well, at this point, yeah. This is the first time I really knew exactly what I would be doing. And this is where it was stated that the project was essentially that of back engineering an extraterrestrial craft.
That must be quite a line to read.
Well, it was, and it was also hard to believe, because certainly going into the project, I was basically a nuts and bolts guy, and certainly didn't believe in UFOs and thought everyone was crazy that even considered the topic. I certainly believe that there was life elsewhere. Certainly life can exist on other planets, other galaxies, other solar systems, but I just found it very hard to believe that there was any intelligent life visiting Earth. And
you had never had any close encounter of the third kind?
No, and I thought people were basically crackpots that thought so.
Whacked out.
But also, Art, he was into science and technology, and he certainly wasn't well-read. I mean, he had never heard of the, Betty and Barney Hill case, or he didn't know anything about the Roswell crash or anything along those lines. I mean, he wasn't interested and he didn't pursue it. And if you all remember, really a decade ago, I mean, some of that information was available, but certainly wasn't prevalent to the point that it is today with websites and movies and television shows.
Oh, indeed. As a matter of fact, before we proceed, Bob, I'd be very, very interested to hear your reaction. I have interviewed now twice, very rare interviews, by the way, hours-long interviews, with Colonel Philip Corso. And I'm kind of interested to get your reaction to Colonel Corso's revelations about the back engineering and insertion into American industry he did of artifacts from the Roswell crash. Were you surprised to hear about that?
This is the first I'm hearing about this.
Is that right?
What is inserted into American industry?
Philip J. Corso, Colonel.
Believe it or not, I really am completely uninterested in the topic of UFOs and never follow it at all.
All right, well,
so I'm in the dark as follows.
From the Kingdom of Nye, this is Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell on the CBC Radio Network.
This is a man who was given the job. He's now 82 years of age, by the way. He was given the job of, he was actually handed a filing cabinet by a general, and he was given a job of figuring out what some of these things were and introducing them into American industry, specifically Bell Labs and some others at the time. And these were artifacts from Roswell, and he is very, very credible. He wrote a book called The Day After Roswell.
What specifically? What devices?
Devices that led to, and it's going to be hard, night vision scopes, for example, fiber optics, for example, the transistor, for example, a lot of leaps that, by the way, particularly the transistor, there's not much of a paper trail for. If you look back at the development in Bell Labs of the transistor, there's not a big paper trail. Yes, it arrived, but there's not a big paper trail about how it arrived.
Well, I'm so skeptical of something like that. The reason being, well, let me tell you, certainly you've seen pictures of the first transistor. We know it was developed at Bell Labs. We know there were a couple of guys working on it. But you know what the first transistor was. It was essentially just, it was more along the lines of a diode, just a P-in and a P-junction. It's on a big slab of silicon. It really couldn't do anything. Certainly, if we had been given that advanced